in terms of sort of meeting people where they're at, I'd love to get any of your reflections on this then. So when I started working in sport and first work with any like elite athletes, what I found really challenging, I've got better at it, but I still think it's one of the harder things, is when you meet someone, I think this is true in all domains, who's being exceptionally successful in what they're doing, they might be a little bit more reluctant to sort of thinking, well, am I going to undo stuff? So here's the thing: you used to always hear this in football, like um, talented player does something stupid, gets sent off. Pundits go, you can't take that out of them. You know, so people kind of, I think, build up this idea that if I start picking at any of my psyche, I'm going to unravel with something. So you've worked with a ton of people who have been extremely successful in what they're doing, and you're kind of going in there and going, let's see if we can make them more successful, you know. And how do you? It's a really, really hard thing to do. And I remember being absolutely terrified of doing that because someone will think, "Geez, what are you going? How are you going to help me?" What's your kind of approach to that? What have you learned from your experience?
Yeah, and I think this is tough. It's a really good question because it's tough to articulate, but I think the best way I can is to say that I think that my training in frameworks such as solution focused brief therapy, motivational interviewing, you pick up a lot of linguistic skills, your capacity to ask open-ended questions, to be inquisitive, to empathize, to listen closely, and to, especially with an approach like solution focused, to be solution oriented and future oriented, and be able to frame the past in a solution and future oriented way. And I'm answering it like this because you build up quite a nimble capacity to acquire information from others. And so, if I'm sitting with somebody and maybe that person, maybe there's an element of they're kind of curious about what you can help um, them with, but their guard is up because, you know what, I was a golfer and I wasn't a footballer, and maybe I'm sitting in front of a footballer, and maybe they're there and they're kind of open, but they're kind of not. And they're super confident anyway with their game. But you're looking for ways to you're looking for mini openings to exploit in order to help them to start to consider better. And it could start there, it could be, well, what does better look like? To meet your points, your case study there where somebody gets sent off and has a disaster, and maybe they do get a bit angry and frustrated at times, but at the same time they think that that could be a good thing and it gives them energy, and only rarely do they get themselves sent off. But I can draw on two things there. I can use my language skills to have a conversation about what would it look like if it's great that you're experiencing energy from your anger or your frustration. And what we know from the psychological research is that may well be true, but how can you direct that appropriate? What would it look like if you hadn't have got sent off there and you had a really good game the rest of the game and you used that energy appropriately? So you're asking a question that's future or solution oriented that helps them start to imagine a world where they didn't get sent off, and they're starting to imagine a world where they're starting to experience that energy as a consequence of anger, but using it appropriately. And then there's so many different directions that you can go in. You can utilize models, players who get angry, but then use that anger appropriately. Or you can draw on the past when they did get angry, but they used it appropriately, the energy. They didn't get themselves sent off, and they were, and they weren't running around like headless chicken, but they were really directing it into their skills. So I think the way I'm trying to answer this, what I'm trying to say is, again, you're reaching out for the language tools in your frameworks. I use scaling a lot. on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being you're as confident as you can be, 1 being you're as far away from as confident as you can be. Where are you now? Even if somebody who's really confident will say 7 or 8. Ah, brilliant. Well, what would 9 look like? How, and then you start talking about the steps to get to 9. Um, I've just find, and this is why I love our world, and I love the psychological frameworks, because there's so many things that you can draw on that you can use to broaden and extend and deepen the conversation with players that manages to help you influence and persuade them. And I think that influence is really, really important. And I think that that's what you get with experience as a practitioner, to speak to what you said, Doug, your 40,000 data points. Well, if you're utilizing your tool over many, many years, you're going to be much quicker to know which direction you want to take things in, depending on those data points. It's classic long-term memory stuff. It's classic pattern identification, right? I can just identify in the midst of a session a moment when I can use a scaling tool or a counter or a strength or the miracle question from Solution Focus, or express empathy in that moment, or ask an open question there, or listening closely here, or draw on a mental skill, or something like that. You recognize the patterns, and then when you do that, you're able to influence even the best players, because you realize, I don't need to have played this game. I don't need to have the knowledge you've got. And if anything, it's a superpower in the room. That's what I use when I walk into a room full of top coaches or players. It's like, hey, you guys have forgotten more about football than I'll ever know. That's not what I'm here for. But what I'm able to do, and take this the right way, but within conversation, I'm able to out-intellectualize somebody who has an enormous knowledge of their sport, but doesn't have the breadth of tools that I do in order to broaden and deepen conversation, that can take somebody who's a bit skeptical about it to somebody who goes, oh yeah, no, I've never really seen it that way. Or yeah, no, I can actually start to see 9 out of 10 and see it like that. And these are the little things, the small steps I can do to improve. So it's just utilizing all those tools, techniques, and frameworks.
I really, really love that. And it's so pertinent because in the last 12 months, I suppose I've become very sensitized to something, and you're picking up on it. And the idea that you have tools, plural, in your toolbox, then you wouldn't believe the number of times I go to a head of learning in an organization or a head of HR and say, I want to introduce the mental toughness concept and the mental toughness measure. And they say, no, thank you. I've already got a psychometric measure. And they'll say, I use MBTI or something like that. And you think, that's the only tool in your toolbox? That can't be. If your door was broken, you wouldn't like a carpenter to turn up with a hammer in the
No.
in the bag.
Yeah.
You'd expect them to have a whole pile of stuff to be able to fix your door.
Yeah.
But why can't
Yeah.
HR and learning professionals be as professional as a craftsman?
Well, and it's that old saying, if you've only got a hammer, everything becomes a nail, right? So, and you can't function like that as a consultant. So yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
One thing I'd love to tap into, and I'm interested. In fact, I'll start with this question. So I'll be interested in getting your thoughts on it. I often get asked, as I'm sure you must have been asked this a million times, what can you learn? And I think the learning goes both ways. But what can you learn from a sports domain that can be applied in other domains, in business and health and education and stuff like that? And I've probably crafted many different answers to that over my time, and it probably changes, but I'd love to hear your response.
And just before you respond, I think
Mhm.
you probably are aware that on LinkedIn in the last couple of weeks, there's been a huge amount of debate on this. Basically, people arguing that you can look at all these world champions, gold medalists, and there's nothing you can learn from them because they're simply exceptional.
Mhm.
Who's arguing that?
It's a lot of to and fro on LinkedIn.
Wow.
My one reflection on kind of working, the thing that surprised me first working with like top athletes is how not special they are. I mean that in a nice way, in a nice way. But coming away from it, like working with, someone who's big name, you just know. But anyway, I'll let Dan.
Yeah, I think that I think that depends. I think that there are. I perhaps countered that respectfully by saying I think there are a lot of special athletes out there. I think there are a lot of. Are there a lot? I don't know. There are some who have a lot of skill in their hands or in their feet, who no matter how they're thinking, they can often, but not always, get away with it. I certainly can think of golfers that I know that maybe I've worked with as well, that I've played alongside, and know about, who can get away with some pretty shoddy thinking at times just because they've got so much skill in their hands. But that there's a degree of interactive complexity there. And I think there's definitely footballers who, and maybe the nature sometimes of team sports, and this is what footballers always argue a little bit of, wow, if I'm not playing so well, it's a team sport and I can get away with it. And we can argue that till the cows come home. But I think there are sports people who can get away with it because they do have, as I say, a lot of skill in their hands or their feet, a lot of athleticism in their body, hand-eye coordination, all of that jazz. But I find that interesting that there's a debate on LinkedIn related to that. I don't think it's I don't think it's an either or. I think it's and also. There are these Olympians, if you like. If we're going to debate about Olympians, they're in a high performance environment. There's not one single one now who's not immersed in a high performance environment, who's not being exposed to high performance tools from a physical, technical, tactical, mental standpoint, meshed together, who, if we're talking about team Olympic sports, isn't exposed to cutting edge leadership processes and teamwork and great coaching science. By and large, it's all pretty well done out there now, and the growth in the development and the learning of these players is very, very dependent and influenced on those high performance environments and high performance people around them. So, for somebody to say, oh, well, they've got to where they've got to on the podium because, they just have skill in their feet or in their hands, is utter nonsense. So I know which side I would be on that one. I think it's and also, not either or. I think you then ask the question, well, what can business learn from sport? Where I become a tiny bit skeptical is probably in two areas. It's and again, take this idea the right way. It's when the person who's got one arm climbs up Everest and stands on the platform and starts to do a motivational talk about that. I understand the interest of that and fair play to them. By the way, I don't know any one-armed people who've climbed up Everest. I've just made that up, but I'm sure there is. What an incredible achievement. How that translates into the business world, that's what I've never quite understood in those kind of symposiums whereby, you've got these motivational speakers who talk about that stuff. Equally, I might argue, and with the greatest respect to anybody, the gold medalist from whichever games 2 decades ago, again, doing a motivational talk to a bunch of business leaders. I sometimes wonder where the relationship lies there. Again, you could argue, well, it's in the audience members and they've got the delegates have to do the mental gymnastics and take from it what they can. You could pose that argument. The other side of where I get a little bit skeptical between the relationship between sport and business, and it's only a small thing, is that ultimately, in the offices around the world, people aren't doing cartwheels and somersaults and trying to hit the target from 40 yards. There isn't any sense of motor control or motor coordination. So I think that piece is missing. But that doesn't mean that there aren't many great processes and practices going on in high performance sport related to high performance environments, high performance cultures, mental skills, individual mental skills, teamwork, leadership, all this stuff. By mental skills, I'd incorporate your work of mental toughness, these kind of things. I think there is absolutely a relationship there, and I think there's a keen two-way interaction to be had there. And I think it's absolutely applicable for a business, a corporate psychologist to take what they're doing in the world of business and inform sport. And I think there's absolutely, and it's been demonstrated time and again with various companies over the years, to take stuff from the world of sport into the world of business. Again, I think there is a relationship. I just think we have to temper it at times, because we have to remember nobody, as I say, in the team meeting when that facilitation is taking place has to hit the dartboard or, has to swing a golf club 100 miles an hour through the impact area whilst trying to hit the ball right to left, and there's no motor control. So there's that. So I think it's an interesting relationship, so I think it exists. It's just making sure. I just believe in a bit more sophistication there. Let's have a conversation. I do work in the world of in the corporate world, right? I don't go out necessarily and try and find it. I have people come to me, and I'll just be honest and say, look, I've never put on a suit in my life. I left school, I was a golfer, then a sports psychologist, or golf coach, and then a sports psychologist. I don't know what it's like to work in an office. However, I can see the relationship between a game face on the pitch and a game face in that facilitation. I think using your control is important, squashing ants, all the things that I do. So I think I can come in and give you this perspective that your people might find useful some of the time for them in some contexts. Other than that, I don't have much else to add.